The team huddled together in the center of the vast chamber, their voices barely audible in the infinite space around them. The weight of the decision they faced seemed to press down on them like the gravity of a black hole, threatening to crush them under its implications. "We're talking about the genocide of our own species," Eric said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "How can we even consider it? Is it genocide if it's evolution?" Sarah asked quietly. "Every species that has ever existed has faced extinction events. Maybe this is just the next step." "The next step for whom?" Tanaka demanded. "For the lucky few who get to transcend? What about everyone else? What about the children who will never get the chance to grow up? What about the artists and teachers and ordinary people who make life worth living?" Webb had been silent throughout the discussion, but now he spoke up. "What if the architects are wrong? What if there's another way?" "There is no other way," Lena said quietly. "I can feel it now, the knowledge they've given us. I can see the patterns of evolution across the galaxy, the way species either transcend or destroy themselves. We're at a crossroads, and we have to choose. But who are we to make that choice?" Eric asked. "We're 5 people out of billions. What gives us the right to decide the fate of our entire species? The same thing that gave us the right to explore the galaxy in the first place," Lena replied. "We're the ones who stepped into the unknown. We're the ones who took the risks. And now we're the ones who have to live with the consequences." "You debate as if you have a choice," the architect's voice echoed in their minds. "But the choice has already been made. Your species will face this trial whether you guide it or not. The question is whether you will be there to help them through it, or whether you will abandon them to face it alone." The chamber around them began to change, showing them visions of possible futures. In one, they saw Earth consumed by war and environmental collapse, its population dwindling as resources became scarce and governments failed. In another, they saw humanity spreading across the galaxy like a plague, consuming world after world until they faced a coalition of alien species determined to stop their expansion. But in a third vision, they saw something different. They saw a humanity that had transcended its current limitations, working alongside other evolved species to nurture new forms of consciousness and guide the development of entire galaxies. They saw a future where the concepts of war and suffering had become obsolete, where beings of pure thought and energy collaborated to create realities that existed beyond the boundaries of physical space. "Is that really possible?" Sarah whispered. "It is the destiny of all species that successfully transcend their current limitations. But it requires sacrifice. It requires the willingness to leave behind the familiar and comfortable in order to become something greater." "Show us," Lena said suddenly. "Show us what we would become." The chamber around them dissolved, and they found themselves standing in a space that existed between dimensions. Here, they could see the true nature of the architects, beings of pure consciousness who had transcended the limitations of physical form eons ago. They were individuals, but they were also part of a collective that spanned multiple galaxies, working together to guide the evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. "This is what awaits those who have the courage to transcend," the architect explained. "Freedom from the limitations of matter and energy. The ability to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The power to create and shape reality according to your will." It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The team could feel the vast intelligence that existed within the collective, the accumulated knowledge and experience of thousands of species that had made the same choice they were now being asked to make. "What happened to the ones who didn't transcend?" Tanaka asked. "They lived out their natural lifespans and passed into history. Their knowledge and experiences were preserved, but they themselves could not survive the transition to higher dimensional existence. This is the nature of evolution. Not all can make the journey. But they could have lived," Eric said. "They could have been happy in their limited existence. Happiness is a primitive emotion. Transcended beings experience forms of fulfillment that have no equivalent in your current dimensional state. The sacrifice is painful, but the reward is beyond your current ability to comprehend." The team stood in silence, contemplating the magnitude of what they were being offered. They could join a community of beings that existed beyond the boundaries of normal space and time, gaining the ability to shape reality itself. But the price was the abandonment of their physical forms and the acceptance of responsibility for guiding their own species through the same process of selection and evolution. If we do this, Lena said finally, can we guarantee that humanity will survive in some form? The transcended will survive. The collective consciousness that emerges from the process will carry forward the best of what your species has achieved. But the individuals who cannot make the transition will be left behind. How do we choose? Sarah asked. How do we decide who gets to transcend and who doesn't? The choice is not yours to make. Each individual must face the trials and prove their worthiness. Your role will be to guide the process, not to predetermine the outcome. But we'll know, Webb said quietly. We'll know that most of them will fail. Yes. And you will have to carry that knowledge for eternity. This is the burden of the architect, to guide evolution while accepting the cost of progress. The weight of that responsibility settled on the team like a physical presence. They would become shepherds of their own species, leading them through a process that would fundamentally change what it meant to be human. And they would have to live with the knowledge that most of those they were trying to save would not survive the transition. What about our families? Tanaka asked. Our friends? The people we care about? They will face the same trials as everyone else. Your emotional attachments cannot influence the process. This is one of the hardest lessons of transcendence, learning to value the growth of consciousness over individual survival. Eric looked at his teammates, seeing the same struggle in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. They had come so far, learned so much, grown in ways they never could have imagined. But the price of that growth was higher than any of them had anticipated. I need to know, he said finally. If we refuse, what happens to the rest of our crew? They will remain on this world, living out their natural lifespans in a reality that has been adjusted to accommodate their needs. They will be happy, but they will never know what they might have become. And if we accept, they will be given the same choice you are being given now. Some will choose to transcend, others will choose to remain in their current dimensional state. But all will have the opportunity to decide their own fate. The team exchanged glances, each seeing the same mixture of fear and determination in the other's eyes. They had come this far together, faced impossible challenges and grown beyond their previous limitations. Whatever decision they made, they would make it as a team. We need a moment, Lena said. Time grows short. The quantum instabilities caused by your arrival are affecting the stability of local space-time. The choice must be made soon. The 5 humans gathered in a tight circle, their voices lowered to whispers as they made the most important decision in the history of their species. I vote yes, Sarah said finally. Not because I want to see billions of people die, but because I can't live with the knowledge that we could have helped them grow and chose not to. I agree, Webb added. If we walk away now, we're condemning our entire species to eventual extinction. At least this way, some of us will survive. Some of us will transcend, Tanaka corrected. But we'll lose everything that makes us human in the process. Will we? Eric asked. Or will we become something more than human? All eyes turned to Lena. As their captain, the final decision was hers to make. She looked at each of her teammates, seeing the trust and faith they had placed in her leadership. Then she looked out at the infinite space around them, contemplating the magnitude of what they were being asked to do. We came out here to explore the unknown, she said finally. To push the boundaries of what humanity could achieve. This is the ultimate frontier, the transformation of consciousness itself. I can't turn away from that, no matter how high the cost. She turned to face the space where she could sense the architect's presence. We accept, she said, her voice carrying the weight of billions of lives. We accept the responsibility of guiding our species through transcendence. Then let your transformation begin. The transformation began subtly, a tingling sensation that started in their fingertips and spread slowly through their bodies. Lena felt her consciousness expanding, her awareness stretching beyond the boundaries of her physical form. She could sense the thoughts and emotions of her teammates, their fears and hopes blending with her own until it became difficult to tell where one mind ended and another began. Do not resist the process, the architect advised. Your individual identities will not be lost, they will be enhanced, becoming part of something greater while retaining their essential nature. The chamber around them began to dissolve, replaced by a space that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Here, they could see the true structure of reality, the quantum foam that underlied all existence, the dimensional barriers that separated different levels of consciousness, the vast networks of energy that connected all living things. Sarah gasped as her understanding of physics expanded exponentially. The equations she had struggled with during her trial now seemed elementary, their solutions obvious and elegant. She could see how matter and energy interacted across multiple dimensions, how consciousness itself was a fundamental force that shaped the fabric of reality. "I can see it," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "The unified field theory we've been searching for, it's not just about forces and particles. It's about the relationship between consciousness and reality itself." Tanaka's transformation was equally profound. Her understanding of life expanded to encompass forms of existence that existed purely as information, as patterns of energy that could persist across multiple dimensional states. She could sense the vast ecosystem of consciousness that existed throughout the universe, from the simple awareness of basic particles to the complex collective intelligence of transcended species. Webb found that his navigational abilities had expanded to encompass not just three-dimensional space, but the entire multidimensional structure of existence. He could plot courses through realities that existed in parallel to their own, navigate the streams of consciousness that connected all living things, and chart the development of entire species across cosmic time. Eric's transformation granted him the ability to coordinate the actions of beings who existed in different temporal and dimensional states. He could sense the collective consciousness of the architects, understand their vast organizational structure, and begin to appreciate the complexity of guiding evolution across multiple galaxies. But it was Lena's transformation that was the most profound. As their leader, she was granted access to the deepest levels of the architect's knowledge. She could see the history of transcendence across the universe, the countless species that had faced the same choice they had just made, and the outcomes of each decision. "You see now why the choice is necessary," the architect explained as her consciousness expanded to encompass the full scope of their responsibilities. "Evolution is not kind. It is not fair. But it is necessary for the continued growth of consciousness throughout the universe." The transformation process accelerated, and Lena felt her physical form beginning to dissolve. But instead of fear, she felt a sense of liberation. The limitations of matter and energy were falling away, replaced by the infinite possibilities of transcended existence. "What's happening to our bodies?" Eric asked, though his voice now came from multiple dimensional states simultaneously. "They are being converted into pure information, preserved within the quantum structure of reality itself. You will be able to assume physical form when necessary, but you will no longer be limited by the constraints of biological existence." The chamber around them had completely dissolved, replaced by a space that existed everywhere and nowhere at once. They were no longer standing on any kind of surface, but floating in the fundamental structure of reality itself. Through this new perspective, they could see the Icarus far below them, a tiny speck of metal and organic matter that contained the rest of their crew. "Your transformation is complete," the architect announced. "You are now able to begin your work as guides for your species. But first, you must decide the fate of your remaining crew members." The 17 people aboard the Icarus appeared before them, not physically, but as patterns of consciousness that the newly transcended humans could perceive directly. Lena could see their thoughts, their fears, their hopes, and their potential for growth. Some, like Chief Engineer Kozlov, showed the intellectual flexibility and emotional strength that might allow them to transcend. Others, like young Ensign Martinez, possessed the curiosity and adaptability that marked potential candidates for transformation. But she could also see those who would struggle with the process. Dr. Patel, the ship's psychologist, was too attached to individual identity to accept the collective nature of transcended existence. Lieutenant Commander Singh had the intelligence but lacked the emotional flexibility to adapt to multidimensional consciousness. You must choose, the architect said. Which of them will be offered the chance to transcend, and which will be allowed to live out their natural lifespans in comfort? The weight of that decision was crushing. These were people they had worked with, lived with, depended on for their survival. Now they were being asked to judge their worthiness for transcendence based on criteria that would have been incomprehensible just hours before. Can't we offer the choice to all of them? Sarah asked. Let them decide for themselves. The process of transformation is traumatic for those who are not prepared. To offer it to someone who cannot succeed is to condemn them to a form of existence that is neither transcended nor natural. It is a cruelty that serves no purpose. But how can we make that choice? Tanaka protested. How can we decide who deserves the chance to grow and who doesn't? By understanding that growth is not a right, it is a possibility that must be earned. Not everyone has the capacity for transcendence, just as not everyone has the capacity for advanced mathematics or artistic creation. The difference is that the consequences of failure are far more severe. Lena studied the consciousness patterns of her former crew members, seeing them with a clarity that was both wonderful and terrible. She could perceive their deepest fears and desires, their strengths and limitations, their potential for growth and their resistance to change. Kozlov showed the greatest potential. His engineering mind was already adapted to thinking in multiple dimensions, and his pragmatic nature would help him accept the harsh realities of transcendence. Dr. Petrov, the ship's physicist, had the intellectual capacity but was too emotionally rigid. Martinez had the adaptability but lacked the wisdom to handle the responsibilities of transcendence. One by one, she evaluated each member of the crew, balancing their potential for growth against the trauma of transformation. It was the most difficult decision she had ever made, but she could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. As an architect, she had to think beyond individual preferences and consider the greater good of consciousness evolution. Kozlov, Martinez, and Dr. Reeves, she said finally, her voice carrying the harmonics of transcended speech. They have the greatest potential for successful transformation. And the others? They will live out their natural lifespans in comfort. We'll create a reality for them that allows them to be happy and fulfilled while remaining in their current dimensional state. It is decided. The transformation will begin immediately. The 3 chosen crew members disappeared from their perception, transported to the transformation chamber where they would face the same trials and choices that the original team had confronted. The remaining 14 would awaken aboard the Icarus to find themselves in a reality that had been subtly adjusted to accommodate their needs. A world where their ship was fully repaired and supplied, where they could live out their lives in comfort and safety. Now comes your true work, the architect explained. You must return to your galaxy and begin the process of guiding your species toward transcendence. But you will not do so alone. The space around them shifted, revealing a vast network of transcended beings that stretched across multiple galaxies. Each species was represented by its own group of architects, beings who had made the same choice and accepted the same responsibilities. They were individuals, but they were also part of a collective that worked together to guide the evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. You will join this network, the architect continued. Your knowledge and experience will be shared with all, and you will have access to the accumulated wisdom of thousands of species. But you will also carry the burden of responsibility for your own people. Lena felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her consciousness like a familiar burden. She had been a captain, responsible for the lives of her crew. Now she was an architect, responsible for the evolution of her entire species. How do we begin? She asked. By returning to your galaxy and establishing the infrastructure necessary for species-wide trials. You will need to create testing facilities, develop selection criteria, and train others to assist in the process. The transformation of an entire species is not a task that can be accomplished quickly. How long will it take? For some species, the process requires centuries. For others, millennia. Your species is young and adaptable, but also chaotic and individualistic. The process will be challenging. The reality around them began to shift again, preparing to transport them back to the Milky Way galaxy. But Lena felt a moment of doubt, a final question that needed to be asked. "Will we still be human?" she asked. "When this is all over, will anything of what we were remain?" "You will be what humanity has the potential to become. The best of your species will be preserved and enhanced, while the limitations that hold you back will be transcended. In time, you will look back on your current existence the way you now look back on your earliest ancestors, with fondness, but also with the understanding that growth requires leaving the past behind." The transformation was complete. The 5 humans who had begun this journey as explorers had become something far greater, and far more burdened. They were no longer bound by the limitations of physical form, no longer restricted to 3-dimensional existence. They had become architects, tasked with guiding their species through the same process of evolution and selection that they had just undergone. As they prepared to return to their galaxy, Lena felt the weight of eternity settling on her consciousness. She had gained the power to shape reality itself, but at the cost of accepting responsibility for the fate of billions of lives. The journey to transcendence had ended, but the real work was just beginning. "Go now," the architect commanded. "Your species awaits, and time grows short. The galaxy must be prepared for what is to come." And with that, the 5 transcended humans began their journey home, carrying with them the knowledge and burden of what humanity must become. The Milky Way galaxy spread out before them like a spiral of stars and possibilities. From their transcended perspective, Lena and her team could see the vast network of human colonies that stretched across the galactic arms, each world a node in the complex web of civilization that their species had built over centuries of expansion. But they could also see the cracks in that civilization, the conflicts brewing between different colony worlds, the resource shortages that threatened established settlements, the technological developments that were pushing humanity toward either transcendence or self-destruction. "Where do we begin?" Sarah asked, her consciousness now capable of processing information from multiple dimensional states simultaneously. "With the infrastructure," Lena replied, her awareness stretching across the galaxy to identify suitable locations for the transformation facilities they would need to build. "We need testing centers, training facilities, and selection protocols. But most importantly, we need to identify the individuals who can help us guide the process." They had chosen to establish their primary facility in the Centauri system, close enough to Earth to maintain oversight of humanity's home world but far enough away to avoid causing panic. The construction would take decades, but from their transcended perspective, time was no longer a limiting factor. Webb began the process of identifying candidates for the initial selection trials. His enhanced navigational abilities allowed him to track the movement of human consciousness across the galaxy, identifying individuals who showed the potential for transcendence. The list was longer than they had hoped but shorter than they had feared. Tanaka focused on understanding the biological and psychological factors that would influence the transformation process. Her expanded awareness of life systems helped her develop protocols for evaluating human potential and managing the trauma of transcendence. Eric began establishing the organizational structure that would be needed to manage the transformation of an entire species. His enhanced coordination abilities allowed him to work with multiple temporal states simultaneously, planning operations that would unfold over centuries. Sarah worked on the theoretical framework that would help other humans understand the nature of transcendence. Her expanded knowledge of physics and consciousness allowed her to develop explanations and training materials that could prepare candidates for the trials ahead. But it was Lena who faced the most difficult task. As the leader of the group, she had to make the ultimate decisions about who would be offered the chance to transcend and who would be left behind. The responsibility was crushing, but she had accepted it willingly. The first facility was completed after 30 years of construction. Hidden within an asteroid field in the Centauri system, it existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, accessible only to those who had been specifically prepared for the journey. The trials were carefully designed to test not just intelligence and adaptability, but emotional strength and moral flexibility. The first candidates were selected from among humanity's most accomplished individuals, scientists, artists, leaders, and explorers who had already pushed the boundaries of human achievement. Some succeeded in transcending their current limitations, joining the growing network of human architects. Others failed, but were allowed to live out their natural lifespans with enhanced comfort and security. As the decades passed, the transformation process began to accelerate. More facilities were built, more candidates were selected, and more humans began the journey toward transcendence. But the process was not without its challenges. Some colony worlds resisted the selection process, viewing it as a threat to their independence. Others embraced it too enthusiastically, creating social divisions between those who were selected for trials and those who were not. The transcended humans found themselves having to manage not just the transformation process, but the social and political upheaval that resulted from it. There were failures as well. Some candidates who seemed promising proved unable to handle the trauma of transcendence, becoming trapped in dimensional states that were neither fully human nor fully transcended. Others succeeded in transcending but were unable to accept the responsibilities that came with their new existence. But gradually, over the course of centuries, humanity began to change. The transcended humans established a new form of civilization that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions, working together to guide the evolution of consciousness throughout the galaxy. Those who remained in their original dimensional state continued to live and work and love, but in a reality that had been carefully adjusted to eliminate the sources of conflict and suffering that had plagued their ancestors. Wars became obsolete as the transcended humans mediated disputes before they could escalate. Disease and aging were conquered through the application of multidimensional healing techniques. The exploration of space continued, but now with the guidance of beings who could perceive the true structure of reality. And through it all, Lena and her team continued their work as architects, carrying the burden of responsibility for their species' evolution. They had gained the power to shape reality itself, but at the cost of accepting the loneliness that came with transcendence. They could observe and guide, but they could never again be fully part of the communities they were working to protect. Standing in the multidimensional space that had become their home, Lena looked out at the galaxy that humanity now shared with its transcended consciousness. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, a future that was both more than human and something that had grown from the best of what humanity could become. Was it worth it? Sarah asked, her consciousness touching Lena's in the way that transcended beings communicated. Lena considered the question, feeling the weight of all the decisions they had made, all the lives they had touched, all the futures they had shaped. The answer was complex, colored by the knowledge of what had been lost and what had been gained. Ask me again in 1,000 years, she replied, when we can see the full consequences of what we've done. But even as she spoke, she knew that the question would never have a simple answer. They had guided their species through the greatest transformation in human history, but the cost had been higher than any of them had imagined. They had become something more than human, but in doing so, they had also become something less, beings of pure consciousness who could touch the lives of billions but could never again experience the simple joys of mortal existence. The transcendence of humanity was complete, but the work of the architects would continue for eternity. Somewhere in the vast network of consciousness that spanned the galaxy, new forms of life were emerging, new challenges were developing, new decisions would have to be made. And Lena and her team would be there to guide the process, carrying the burden of responsibility for the evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. They had become the shepherds of infinity, forever watching over the growth of awareness and understanding in all its myriad forms. The story of humanity's expansion to the stars had ended. The story of their transcendence had just begun. In the depths of space, the abandoned city of the first architects continued its eternal dance between dimensions, waiting for the next species to find their way to its crystalline halls. The cycle of evolution continued, as it had for eons, as it would for eons to come. And in the space between realities, the consciousness that had once been Captain Lena Voss continued her work, guiding the transformation of species across the galaxy, carrying the weight of eternity on her transcended shoulders. The journey to Pluto had been the last step in humanity's expansion through the Milky Way. The journey beyond had been the first step in their transformation into something greater than they had ever imagined possible. The future stretched out before them, infinite and unknowable, filled with possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of mortal understanding. And somewhere in that vast expanse of transcended consciousness, the essence of what had once been human continued to grow and evolve, reaching toward heights of awareness that could never be fully comprehended by those who had not made the journey themselves. The last colony had become the first step toward transcendence. The exploration of space had become the exploration of consciousness itself. And the species that had once been human had become something that existed everywhere and nowhere, touching all realities while belonging fully to none. In the end, it was not the destination that mattered, but the journey itself. And for humanity, that journey had only just begun.